Hello, Wanderers! Today we will finish our breakdown of the chapter called The Fall of Gondolin from the book called The Silmarillion, written by JRR Tolkien and published in 1977 after his death. A link to purchase The Silmarillion is in the show notes. Welcome! In the Lord of the Rings podcast, we wander the world of J.R.R. Tolkien by exploring the foundational epic stories from the deep past of Middle-earth. If you enjoyed Tolkien's books, or maybe Peter Jackson's movies, or perhaps you're excited for Amazon Studios' new series, The Rings of Power, and you want to dive deeper into the rich world of Middle-earth, then listen and subscribe. Magovanyan, fellow wanderers. Today's episode date is June 23. We are 70 days away from Amazon's debut of the Rings of Power series. On this day in Middle-earth, in the year 2942 of the Third Age, Bilbo the Hobbit has returned to the Shire with the One Ring. In the year 3018, Sauron has attacked Osgiliath, and Gollum has escaped from Mirkwood after Thranduil has been attacked. This is adapted from the Today Middle-earth History calendar on the OneRing.net. Let's check the map. These map checks are inspired by the beautiful maps that accompany the Lord of the Rings books, and I hope give you the context for today's story. If none of this makes sense, please listen to a few previous episodes and catch back up. It is the first age of Middle-earth. Morgoth, the Dark Lord, is searching for the single remaining elven stronghold that challenges his dominion, Gondolin, the Hidden City, founded by Turgon, son of Fingolfin. Tuor, a man, has been led by Ulmo to Gondolin to deliver a message of warning to Turgon. Turgon has also consented to the marriage of his daughter Idril to Tuor. Maeglin, Turgon's nephew, desires to have Idril, and his anger and resentment grows as Tuor gains power and influence in Gondolin. A quick reminder, we're following the tale as it is written in the Silmarillion, but I'll add one or two details from a book that Tolkien's son Christopher published called The Fall of Gondolin, and which contains many manuscripts of various versions and Christopher's analysis on the evolution of the tale. If you're interested, a link to purchase The Fall of Gondolin from Amazon is in the show notes for this episode. We pick up the story with Tuor and Idril, and the birth of their son, Eärendil Half-Elven. Eärendil was born 503 years since the Noldor had returned to Middle-earth from Valinor. Eärendil is described as having the beauty and wisdom of the elves, like his mother, and the hardiness of men, like his father. And, quote, a light was in his face as the light of heaven. More about Eärendil will come in the next episode, but just a little teaser. If you've seen the trailer for the Rings of Power, you'll notice a giant statue of a man overlooking a bay of ships. That statue is of Eärendil. Now, even in these days of peace and bliss, Idril's heart was filled with foreboding. So she causes a secret tunnel to be dug that leads under the walls of the city and opens on the plains far to the north. It's important to note that news of this tunnel did not come to Maeglin's ears. So let's look at Maeglin for a minute. Since his mother's murder and his father's trial, his resentment towards Turgon had grown, and his jealousy and lust for Idril had fostered a great hatred in his heart towards Tuor and Turgon. Maeglin was particularly gifted in mining and quarrying, and had the habit of defying the king's order by going beyond the defensive mountains surrounding Gondolin. While outside the defenses, Maeglin is captured by orcs, who take him to their master Morgoth in Angband. Morgoth tortured and broke Maeglin, and Maeglin, quote, purchased his life and freedom by revealing to Morgoth the very place of Gondolin. Morgoth released Maeglin swiftly, lest the elves suspect treachery, and to aid the assault from within the walls. Quote, and he abode in the halls of the king with smiling face and evil in his heart. When Eärendil is 7 years old, Morgoth let loose his prepared armies for the sacking of Gondolin. His forces included Balrogs, orcs, wolves, and dragons. The attack came at the time of festival, an old trick of Morgoth's when he killed the two trees of Valinor. As the sun set in the west, the northern sky was filled with red light and fire, and Morgoth's forces came over the mountains. Many brave deeds were done, and the lord of the Balrog Scothmog was slain in the square of the king, and the tower of Turgon was razed, and Turgon fell. Now, as far as the Silmarillion goes, there's pretty much one paragraph that describes the battle. However, in other versions of the tale, Tolkien describes the battle and fall of Gondolin in much greater detail. In what Christopher Tolkien had called the original tale, you can find a description of the 12 battalions of elves that were able to marshal in defense of the city, including descriptions of their leaders, emblems, and army. Tuor, for example, had gathered a following, and on their helms they had wings like swans or gulls, and the emblem of the White Wing on their shields. I imagine that their helms would have been a precursor to the crown that Aragorn wears after the War of the Ring, a crown that is described in Return of the King as, quote, all white, and the wings at either side were in the likeness of the wings of a seabird. Maeglin also leads a company in battle, but they bore no symbol and instead were arrayed simply with the color black. Turgon, the king, and his company wore the colors of the royal house, white, gold, and red, with the emblems of the moon, sun, and scarlet heart. I'm sure there's some significance to those details, but I don't know what it would be. There were also the soldiers of the Swallow, the Heavenly Arch, the Pillar, the Tower of Snow, the tree, the fountain, the harp, and the hammer of wrath. I particularly like that name, not to mention the company of the Golden Flower, led by Glorfindel, who we'll hear about more in just a minute. Also of note is Idril, who, quote, arrays herself in mail, and also arrays Eärendil, though only a child, in, quote, a tiny coat of mail that she had let fashion in secret. Seeing this great elven army arrayed in such colors and emblems must have been an impressive sight, but as impressive as it may have been, it wasn't enough to stem the tide of Balrog's orcs and dragons. We're not done yet. If you like this episode, please leave a review and share with your friends. And remember to subscribe if you haven't already. We'll be right back.
Do you ever find yourself thinking about who would win in a fight between Goku and Superman? Hi, I'm James Gavsey, and on the Who Would Win show, me and my co-host Ray ignore anything important happening in the outside world and debate fictional battles between characters from comics, movies, and video games.
We got a new show every week, and almost always am I the winner.
Yeah, not true, Ray.
In the past, we've discussed such matches as Captain America versus Darth Vader, Solid Snake versus the Iron Giant, classic matchups like RoboCop versus Terminator, and even the Muppets versus Sesame Street.
That one was crazy. So if you're a fan of geek culture and love a spirited debate, check out the Who Would Win show wherever you get your podcasts, or check us out at whowouldwinshow.com.
In the course of the battle, Maeglin attempts to seize little Eärendil and throw him from the high walls of the city. He is prevented by Tuor, who fights Maeglin and eventually tosses him over the walls of the city, and thus fulfills the death prophecy of Maeglin's father. Tuor and Idril gather what survivors they can and lead them through Idril's secret tunnel, away from the city. The flame of the dragons had turned the fountains of Gondolin into a great steam, and so the plains were thick with mist. This aided the refugees, who were unmarked on the plains, and they began to climb into the cold and terrible mountains through a pass near a rocky abyss. This pass was watched by Morgoth's servants, notably a band of orcs led by a single Balrog. As a quick refresher, Balrogs come from the semi-divine class of beings called the Maiar, who were lesser spirits to the Valar but still powerful. The Balrogs were quick to follow Morgoth and his evil ways. These were horrific creatures. You remember the one that contended with Gandalf in Moria. Well, the refugees of Gondolin would have been destroyed by this Balrog, if not for, quote, the Valar of yellow-haired Glorfindel, chief of the House of the Golden Flower of Gondolin, and the help of the Eagles, who were also of the class of the Maiar, but served the righteous High King Banwë. The Eagles cast the orcs into the abyss, and Glorfindel dueled with the Balrog on a pinnacle of rock, eventually defeating it, but he also dies and falls into the abyss. Eärendil, Lord of Eagles, retrieves his body, and, quote, they buried him in a mound of stones beside the pass. Now, the very careful reader of Tolkien will recognize the name Glorfindel, while those who have only seen the movies will be missing out on this great character. You see, in the Fellowship of the Ring, Frodo is stabbed by the Nazgul, and Aragorn and the hobbits are trying to rush him to Rivendell. In Peter Jackson's movies, help comes in the form of Arwen, Elrond's daughter, who finds them and takes Frodo to Rivendell. Now, I really love these scenes. What, a ranger caught off his guard? And the great horse race to Rivendell with 9 Nazgul racing behind her. However, that's not what Tolkien wrote. Help came to Frodo from a great elf named Glorfindel, who drove off the Nazgul temporarily and gave Frodo his horse to speed to Rivendell. Before fainting, Frodo saw a shining white figure, which Gandalf later explained, quote, yes, you saw him for a moment as he is upon the other side. One of the mighty of the firstborn. He is an elf lord of a house of princes. Glorfindel was even an active participant in the Council of Elrond, being among the first to suggest that the One Ring needed to be destroyed. So here is a riddle. If Glorfindel died, protecting the refugees of Gondolin from a Balrog in the First Age, is the Glorfindel at Rivendell the same elf? How is that possible? The answer is yes. This is the same Glorfindel. The issue of elvish reincarnation is a complicated one, and I don't think Tolkien ever came to an answer that he was satisfied with. And I won't even pretend to understand all that Tolkien did write on this question. But in Karl Hostetter's book, The Nature of Middle-earth, we find this little passage in Tolkien's later writings. The Valar, using the spirit of an elf, and, quote, having among them as a whole a complete power over the physical substances of Middle-earth, they could reconstitute a body totally suitable to the deprived spirit. Indeed, when Manwë, king of the Valar, expressed hesitation to Ilúvatar about reincarnating the spirits of the elves, Ilúvatar says, quote, let the houseless be rehoused. The former body, as it was before the injury that caused to death, may be restored. Boom. You didn't know we were going to go that deep today, but there you go. Let's return to the Gondolin refugees. Led by Tuor, they pass over the mountains and finally heed the advice from Ulmo. They follow the river Sirion south. There they joined with the refugees of Doriath, led by Elwing, granddaughter of Luthien and Beren. On the Isle of Balar, just a little across the sea from the mouths of the river Sirion, Gil-galad is named High King of the Noldor. And here on the coasts and on the Isle of Balar, quote, the gleanings of Doriath and Gondolin settled. At this time Ulmo spoke before the Valar, and urged them to forgive the elves, and rescue them from the might of Morgoth, but he was denied. Yet the wise said that, quote, only one speaking in person for the cause of both elves and men, pleading for pardon, might move the councils of the powers. But we'll get to that next time. Today we close out with Tuor, who grew to old age, but a longing for the sea grew ever in his heart. And so he built a ship, quote, and with Idril Celebrimbor he set sail into the sunset and the west, and came no more into any tale or song. So ends the tale of the Fall of Gondolin, founded by Turgon under inspiration from Ulmo, protected by secrecy and the vigilance of the eagles, but eventually destroyed by dragons and Balrogs. Not even Gondolin could withstand the evil might of Morgoth. Yet from this tale we see the second union of elves and men, and Eärendil has been born, to be a hope and a light to the elves and men. We'll dive into that tale next week. My friends, if you enjoyed this episode, let me know by subscribing, leaving a review, and sharing with your friends. Follow me on Facebook or Instagram at Lore of the Rings Podcast. For feedback on the show, please email me using the link in the show notes. Until next Thursday, remember, not all those who wander are lost.